There is one single devastating piece of evidence that obliterates every current psychological theory and diagnostic categorization of narcissistic psychopaths. A neurobiological non-negotiable that can't be explained away as learned behaviors, cultural constructs, trauma responses, or defensive mechanisms. That by the end of this video, you will see why everything you have been taught about narcissists and psychopaths is full of neurological impossibilities, statistical improbabilities, diagnostic logic, and has put civilization itself on the tipping point of collapse altogether. And I have the science and math to prove it. So let's begin. Across the animal kingdom and 200 million years of evolution, our neural circuits have been programmed with one command that overrides everything else. Protect your offspring. Oxytocin and vasopressin trigger that drive. Dopamine rewards it. The stress system lights up when offspring are threatened. Pain processing centers register offspring distress as personal distress. It's not learned. It's not cultural. It is a biological law. Even the most violent primate mothers will panic at the sound of their infant's scream. Now, contrast that with narcissistic psychopaths. They can listen to their child cry and feel nothing. They will inflict personal harm at their convenience. They will abandon them without emotional distress when their children no longer serve their purposes. If someone can override the most fundamental biological imperative that ensures species survival, an imperative so powerful that parents across species will die protecting their offspring, we are witnessing something far more profound than a defensive mechanism or an emotional wound. Defense mechanisms exist to protect the ego from psychological pain. This drive would be enhanced, not eliminated. Wounded people typically overprotect their children. People with attachment trauma often become hypervigilant parents. Individuals with trust issues show increased protectiveness towards their genetic legacy. But these individuals show consistent offspring exploitation across time. No amount of insight changes the fundamental pattern. The behavior reveals absence, not covering, and confirms that they do not see others as equals, because if anything would spark any kind of actual human emotion, it would be one's child. And if you can look at your own child's suffering and feel nothing, deliberately cause that suffering for your own personal gain, view your child's needs as an inconvenience, abandon them without a backward glance when they're no longer useful, and exploit them sexually, financially, emotionally without internal conflict, then you fundamentally don't see them as separate beings with an inherent worth. The profound risk of this is that if biological offspring aren't safe, no one is safe. Their cruelty isn't reactive. It is strategic. It is parasitic. It is predatory. It removes any assumption of protective boundaries, indicates complete absence of intrinsic moral constraint. It is the ultimate litmus test. When the most ancient sacred circuitry in nature is inverted into a mechanism of control, we are not talking about psychological disorders anymore. We are talking about a different blueprint of mind. And why this is impossible to dismiss. It's not just the behavior, it's the pattern. This pattern has been observed, documented, and grappled with for as long as humans have been recording their observations about human nature. The language may have changed across cultures and eras. The frameworks have shifted from religious to philosophical to medical, but the phenomenon being described remains disturbingly consistent. Emperors who burned cities and called it glory. Nobles who tortured for entertainment. Priests who preached love while preying on trust. Every culture, every age, the same blueprint. They were identifying a behavioral pattern so destructive and so unresponsive to any form of correction that they deemed it an existential threat to the fabric of society itself. That is not coincidence. That is evolutionary consistency. The most alarming part about this is that our ancestors were actually more scientifically accurate in their understanding of this phenomenon than we are today, and they didn't even have the science because they understood something critical. They recognized the binary nature of what they were seeing. You either had a soul or you didn't. There was no partially possessed by demons, no mild case of soullessness, no spectrum for somewhat evil to very evil. You were either a human with a conscience, or you were something else entirely. They were accurate in identifying this, because this is not a different category of being, not a damaged version of a typical person with a conscience. Our severity ratings are inverted danger assessments, calibrated for the wrong thing and measuring the wrong problems, because every tool we use to measure severity of these conditions is developed to use on individuals who function like humans, interpreting deviations as impairments or dysfunctions, qualifying degree of deviation as severity. But this will only work if everyone being measured has the same underlying cognitive architecture. We're trying to assess aliens using tests designed for humans and concluding that the aliens who are best at mimicking humans are the healthiest aliens, when actually they're the most dangerous ones. The mild cases aren't less dangerous, they're more dangerous because they're more effective and better hidden. The ones we say are the most severe and dangerous aren't. It's just that they've already been called or contained. We're measuring predatory competence and calling it a severity disorder. The brain scans and the math tell a different story. NPD, ASPD, and psychopathy were truly independent conditions with separate etiologies, separate genetic factors, separate developmental pathways, separate neural mechanisms. They should occur together at roughly the rate you'd predict by chance, which would be about 0.24%. But they don't. They co-occur anywhere, depending on the study, from 50 to 90%. That is not random occurrence. That is not comorbidity mystery. That is a massive correlation that demands an explanation. In medicine, when you see a level of comorbidity, it usually means one of two things. Either the condition causes the other, or they are not actually separate conditions. They're different presentations of the same underlying pathology. From a statistical and mathematical standpoint, there being separate conditions is statistically improbable. Because in statistics, anything with 50% co-occurrence or greater is not likely to be two different things, but the same thing measured differently. If these were truly different, we would expect different neural signatures, but we don't see that. Consistently across the board in all three have reduced activation in their amygdala, their anterior cingulate cortex, insula, their prefrontal cortex. These aren't different brain patterns for NPD versus ASPD versus psychopathy. These are the same brain regions showing reduced function across all supposedly separate conditions. This is exactly what you would see if there was one underlying neural architecture difference, not multiple separate conditions with coincidentally similar brain patterns. If these were independent conditions, they should have independent genetic architectures, but they don't. The genetic factor overlap significantly. All suggest shared genetic underpinnings. This should have raised flags in psychiatry decades ago. Clinical taxonomies produce high, double, and triple counting 60 to 7% co-occurrence. The simplest explanation is not multiple diseases, but multiple measures of one architecture under different observation angles. Instruments weighed for grandiosity detect narcissism. Instruments weighed for rule violation detect antisocial. Instruments weighed for effective poverty detect psychopathy. The friction, contradictions, and impossibilities within criteria are symptoms of slicing a single system into thirds. Researchers who specialize in one of these categories and barely communicates with researchers studying the others. We have entirely separate bodies of literature. We have arguments about whether narcissism is primarily about insecurity or primarily about exploitation, between primary psychopathy and secondary psychopathy, between the impulsive antisocial type and the calculated manipulated type, cataloging the 1,000 different ways water can flow while failing to recognize that it's all the same substance. Yes, there are differences in the presentation. Of course there are. These individuals with intact cognitive function, oftentimes high intelligence, operating in diverse environments with different opportunities and different constraints. At times, they'll use rage. intimidation, other times charm and seduction. They may employ pity and victimhood. They will sometimes leverage sexuality, sometimes spirituality. Sometimes they'll use therapy language. Sometimes they create overt misery. They want to see you cry, to watch you break. Other times, they may use confusion or destabilization and enjoy watching you doubt your own perception. Sometimes they prefer public humiliation. Other times, private degradation or financial devastation. All depending on what they're after, the environment they're in, and what works best for that particular person or situation. We've become hypnotized trying to hone in on any given group of them, forgetting that that's just what we're seeing, forgetting that these individuals are shape-shifting con artists. Underneath all that bullshit and surface variation is a core pattern that remains absolutely consistent. A total disregard for others as autonomous beings, complete lack of effective theory of the mind, no empathy, no remorse, no real humanity inside. Driven by power, control, and domination. That's the pattern. Everything else is decoration. And this is identical, whether we're talking about the charming con artist, the manipulative coworker, or the predatory guru. The ultimate danger we miss is that these individuals don't represent a variation in normal human psychology. They represent an entirely different operating system. To them, you are not a person with inherent worth. You're either useful or you're not. Every pro-social human trait becomes a lever for manipulation. The thing that binds communities together, trust, goodwill, assumption of good faith, social contracts, reciprocity, care for the collective welfare of all. These aren't values to be upheld in their eyes. They're vulnerabilities to be exploited. They understand these social mechanisms intellectually, oftentimes better than most people. But they understand them as a predator understands prey behavior. This is how the prey moves, so this is how I position myself to catch it. Neuroscience shows the blueprint. Empathy circuits offline, reward centers in overdrive, moral brakes missing, a mind built not for connection, but for control. A biological masterpiece of deception, and a moral black hole in the middle of our species. And the question we need to ask isn't why do some humans have low empathy, but how do we organize a society when one type of consciousness is fundamentally incapable of recognizing others as equally real? These aren't broken humans who need fixing. They're perfectly functioning predators. The wolf breeds as fast as the sheep. The wolf becomes shepherd, and the shepherd holds the keys to the apocalypse. That is not a metaphor. That is math. Because for most of history, the damage was able to stay localized. A predatory tribal chief could wipe out his people, but not the species. Even emperors had limits. No single ruler could destroy civilization itself. There was always other tribes, other continents, other humans to carry on. Destruction took time, effort, proximity. Armies needed months to mobilize. Weapons needed raw materials. Distance diluted damage. But beginning in the 20th century, that changed. 13,000 nuclear warheads exist on this planet. Some can vaporize cities the size of New York in a second. Launch authority in a major nuclear state is designed for speed, not empathy. It bypasses committees, emotion, and delay. Decision windows are measured in minutes. History records multiple near misses, averted only because someone felt horror at the prospect of killing billions. What if the next one doesn't feel anything at all? In 2025, CRISPR kits cost less than a weekend vacation. Synthetic biology labs can assemble extinct viruses from online code. International oversight remains almost non-existent. A single researcher, curious, vengeful, or delusional, could play God with civilization itself. Most scientists feel awe or terror at that power. Fear stops most people. It doesn't stop them. It's their advantage. We created assessments, psychological assessments to detect mental instability, not moral voids. High-functioning predators easily pass standards of evaluation. They know the right words, the right expressions, and the right fucking mask. They don't just fake empathy, they study it, perfect it, and deploy it like a weapon. They don't blend in by accident. They blend in by design. Once such individuals reach power, removal becomes nearly impossible. They control narratives, eliminate rivals, and turn oversight bodies into mirrors of themselves. Cults of personality replace accountability. Loyalty becomes currency, and the time society recognizes the threat, it's already terminal. We already know what happens when species lose its elders, its empathy, its balance. We see it in Zimbabwe, when poachers slaughtered the older elephants. The ones who taught restraint, bonding, and boundaries, the young began to change. They formed gangs. They attacked rhinos. They killed tourists for sport, not for survival, for dominance. Scientists called it a collapse of social learning. A generation raised without empathy, without models of restraint. Sound familiar? We recognize the problem instantly. We said they've lost their guidance. We studied it, we funded it, and we intervened. But when it happens to humans, when human societies show the exact same symptoms, we call it politics, culture, or human nature. We treat it like noise. Today's individual power has outstripped every natural and social restraint. We've built institutions that systemically reward the very traits nature designed to stay rare. Recruitment pipelines favor confidence, not conscience. Institutions reward results, not reflection. The barrier between thought and extinction keeps getting thinner. And the outcome is predictable. The people least afraid of catastrophe are the ones closest to the trigger. It's not new. History already wrote the warning in blood. Each one a case study in what happens when the wrong mind gains unchecked power. A shark doesn't become a dolphin with enough therapy. A parasite doesn't become symbiotic with the right childhood. And someone born without the neural architecture for shared humanity doesn't develop it from talking about their feelings. These aren't broken humans who need fixing. They're predators playing a totally different game. Ancient societies knew this. They didn't try to rehabilitate them. They didn't try to fix them. They recognized them, isolated them, and protected the community from them. We thought we were more enlightened. We thought everyone could be saved. We thought love could conquer all. And while we've been singing Kumbaya, they have been taking over the world. We thought the apocalypse would come from the sky, but well, it turns out it comes from a boardroom, a lab, the pulpit, and the courtroom. Understanding the difference between hardware and software, between mask and authentic presentation, between strategic adaptation and genuine change, between differences in degree and different species of mind might be the most important protective knowledge you can have. Because accuracy protects. Understanding, true understanding, not comforting projection, keeps people safe. And maintaining our shared humanity while protecting it from those who don't share it. That's not contradicting. That is wisdom. If we keep pretending it's 1%, keep assuming everyone's fundamentally good, keep giving world-ending power to those shameless enough to grab it. It's playing Russian roulette, where every chamber has a bullet, and it ain't gonna end well. Or we can face the uncomfortable truth. We can acknowledge that human predators exist. We stopped pretending not to see the elephants in our own species. We contain dangerous, and we survive. And the choice, my friend, is yours. So choose wisely. Focus on you. Fuck the narcissist, or whatever you want to call them.